Now what I'm going to do is go through this fairly quickly. I've really only got about 20 minutes, but down the track, if people want a specialist workshop, I'm happy to do that. I was conscious of what Donna said about having people all around the state. We're happy to, if people want to collate questions to us, of coming back with documented responses to those questions that can go around the state as well. So we really will adapt to meet in with your business needs. I'm the Senior Director Policy at Workplace Health and Safety in Queensland. This is, now, in terms of the development of harmonised laws, this is a Council of Australian Government's decision to do this under the Business Regulation Reform Agenda. And a lot of people don't understand that. For Queensland, there's competition payments linked to the implementation of this law, and it involves significant sums of money. So what the Australian governments wanted to do was make sure that the standards were consistent around Australia and, more importantly, implemented consistently by inspectors and others. Now, we've worked very hard at that, so as well as these laws, we've done a whole lot of back-end stuff in terms of training of the inspectorates so people will act consistently. So what we've done, recognising it's a business regulation reform agenda, we've repealed the former 1995 Workplace Health and Safety Act. We've done changes to the Electrical Safety Act to ensure it's consistent, and we've repealed the Dangerous Goods Storage and Management Act. So all the dangerous goods stuff now is covered under the Work Health and Safety Act. All right, what's new for Queensland? We haven't had the change of other states because we've had the concept here of person conducting a business or undertaking. Most other jurisdictions had their health and safety laws based around an employer-employee relationship, whereas we recognised very early on that there was more than one person that could owe a duty in a workplace. So if you look at a modern workplace, say for example a storage facility on the Gold Coast Highway, you can have Linfox running trucks, Woolworths might have some stuff there in the cold stores, you'll have labour hire coming in peak demand periods to drive forklifts and unload, you'll have cleaners from another company, and then you'll have some of the facilities owners' staff there as well. So you have a whole multitude of people where their health and safety is intrinsically linked, and the issues that affect them in that environment are similar. So that's what they're wanting to address in these new laws. We've done some changes to executive officers to make it clearer, new duties on workers, and I'll deal with some of this stuff. The big change for Queensland is consultation cooperation, where there's a direct obligation on a person conducting a business or undertaking to consult their staff. So a person conducting a business, sorry, I've been through the duties, where are we? Now, a PCBU, as they're called, has a primary duty of care, and that involves a number of things. Provision and maintenance of safe work environment, provision and maintenance of plant and structures, systems of work, safe use and handling and storage of plant and substances, provision of information, instruction and training, welfare facilities such as meal rooms, toilets, potable water and so on, and monitoring the conditions of workers at the workplace. So if you're conducting a business undertaking, these are what your obligations are. So Donna mentioned that there was a number of groups involved with volunteers, so I wanted to put in a slide that covers off that. Is basically when it comes down to volunteer organisations, if you employ people, then you are a person conducting a business or undertaking. If you just give people an honorarium, that is not paying someone. So in that context, a person conducting a business or undertaking has an obligation to ensure the health and safety of volunteers the same as the paid staff in the organisation. So if you're looking at something like Blue Nurses, they'll have voluntary people working alongside their paid employees. And it's important not to distinguish in terms of the health and safety obligations in that sense. Now, if a voluntary organisation doesn't employ anyone, then they don't come under this Act. And that's an important distinction. It's where they have a business, an undertaking, that's the critical factor. So another change for Queensland is the concept of reasonably practicable, and there's a guide to the Act over there, so all this is in it. Previously in Queensland you had an absolute duty for health and safety. Now we recognise that there's a number of factors in there. How likely is it that harm or risk may occur? What harm could result from the hazard of risk, and so on. So that what will happen is that we need to sit down when an incident occurs and assess it in the context of that. You will also make representations in relation to that. Now, the duty on officers has changed. We used to have a concept that was called attributed liability. So, for example, if your business had an incident that occurred, we could say, by virtue that the incident occurred in your business, you were at fault as a director or an officer. Whereas now, it's moved away from that. And so, so what it is now is that it's your contribution to the incident as a director or an officer. So it's much, much clearer and it's much, much fairer. Oops. So voluntary officers, again, I wanted to cover this off, this is important. So if you're on the local P&C and you're a voluntary person that's doing it, the P&C employ people, so it is a PCBU, or person conducting a business or undertaking, but you do not have a duty under the Act, or you can't be prosecuted in relation to that, where you give your time voluntarily. And we were very clear about that nationally when we were debating this across the table, because what we didn't want to do was in any way stop volunteerism in Australia. We recognise the importance of it, and the governments and ministers involved in finalising this were very clear on that. So if you volunteer at a local childcare group or whatever, you will not have an obligation under the Act in relation to your duties as an officer. So what office is required to do? And it's important, and there's actually a handout here for you on this. It's defined in the Act, so it's very clear for everyone. As an officer, you've got an obligation, and this is the most senior people in the business. It's not supervisors or people at that level. So, for example, in the public service, it would be your SES officers. In general businesses, it'd be your CEOs and probably one rung down. But all the legal advice is it doesn't go down to supervisors and general managers. So they've got to acquire knowledge of workplace health and safety matters, understand the nature and operation and associated hazards and risks of the business, ensure resources and processes to eliminate or minimise risks, ensure processes for receiving, considering and responding to workplace health and safety information in a timely way, and ensure processes and implementation for complying with duties, and of course verifying compliance. One case that I like to talk about in this sense is going on at the moment, and it was a coal mine disaster in Greymouth in New Zealand. Now in that situation, the mine was unusual. It actually goes uphill. Now it was in very gaseous coal. So what would happen is, of course, that as they mined, the gas leach from the coal would go to the face. Now, they had no gas detection equipment in that mine. So, very clearly, if this legislation was in place there, the first three components there would be a breach of. Because clearly there was a known hazard and risk in that situation. So, what this does is set out for businesses very clear steps that they've got to work through. And the big change in Queensland here is these two here. nowhere in our legislation before have we had an express obligation on people to have knowledge of hazards and risks in their business. So in terms of workers, we've got some new stuff there. Workers must take reasonable care for their own health and safety and ensure that their actions or activities do not adversely affect other persons. Under the 95 Act, there was just an obligation not to act willfully. So there is a change. Now the definition of worker has changed too. So if you go back to that example I had of the warehousing facility on the Gold Coast, it now picks up a whole range of people that you may have an obligation to. And we're happy to work with groups to explain how that might work. So, for example, if you're running a business with some outdoor activities, you have contractors in to work in that business, you're going to have an obligation to them in some ways for the overall operation of the business and to make sure their actions or business activities don't necessarily impact on a person that might be working just near them. So if you look at a construction site now, the work of steel fixers or concreters who are working side by side aren't adversely affected, or electricians and plumbers. So it will be a case of having to work through what your duty is in relation to those people. So with an employee, it's nice and easy. You know what your obligation is to ensure safety. With an employee of a contractor, you may have an overall obligation, but the contractor also has very specific duties for that employee too. So it will chop and change. Oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. So, and again, volunteers, I don't think there'd be any surprise in that. Again, I'd like to reinforce that just because people get an honorarium or get their fuel subsidy or a meal subsidy doesn't make them, it doesn't create a person conducting a business or undertaking situation. So again, workers, as I mentioned, they have to take reasonable care for their own health and safety, reasonable care that the conduct does not adversely affect others. They must comply so far as is reasonably practical with any instruction and cooperate with notified procedures. So, you know, this isn't a big change, but it more clearly sets out that all parties in the workplace have an obligation. Oops, what did I do? So, really, that's all I wanted to go through now, because I wanted to leave maximum time, if I can, at the end for questions. So, thank you.